So, what we're gonna do, by this point you probably have this Rhino file open, but we're actually gonna open Unreal. Now, I usually have a little icon that just opens Unreal directly, but maybe if you first downloaded Unreal, probably what you're gonna end up doing is going to the Epic's game launcher. So if you can't find it, you can just click on the little magnifying glass and type in Epic Games Launcher. I don't know. Maybe you play video games and you have a bunch of games in here already. And if that's the case and your home is populated with games, then you probably just want to go down to the bottom and click Unreal Engine. It'll bring up this screen here where you're going to see a few tabs here. So Unreal Engine, there's some great learning tabs. There is Twinmotion, which might seem like, oh, this is really what we want to do because it's kind of fast real-time architectural visualization. The reason why I'm sticking to Unreal Engine proper rather than Twinmotion is that Unreal Engine is free. Twinmotion is free for educators and students, but I want you guys to be able to use this outside of school as well. And Unreal Engine allows you to sort of tweak a lot more things. So that's why we're sticking with Unreal Engine proper. You'll also see your library, which brings up different projects that you might have worked on, as well as a marketplace, which we'll sort of talk a little bit next class to get some free materials. And like I said, the tutorials as well. So these are good to watch if you want to learn more. What you're going to do is you're going to click on Launch Unreal Engine in the upper right hand corner here, and that's going to bring up this little splash screen. Now you might not have any recent projects, probably don't if this is your first time opening it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start a new project, and we're going to go to new project categories. And we are going to go down to the architecture, engineering, and construction. Originally, I thought we'd start with games, but then I realized it might take like 15 minutes to just remove the gun shooting noise from our architectural walkthrough. So I decided to just stick with this one. And we are going to go to the ArcViz template. So this is kind of our starting material. So you see it as this weird, I don't know, kind of parametric-ish looking blob thing. So we'll click next. And then you want to make sure that you're starting with starter content, because we're going to use some of the things in here, primarily the sky and the sun. And then you also want to set ray tracing to be disabled. If you have a new graphics card which can do ray tracing, you can try this out. I have never been able to get this work, even though my graphics card should be able to do ray tracing, so I wouldn't suggest it for this class. Now, down at the bottom here, you're going to see select a location for your project to be stored. You can click on the little dots there to change your project or where it's stored. And then you can also give it a name. So in this case, maybe I'll call it 2007 722. Oh, I guess it asks begin with an alphabetical character. I never knew that. So DM2, and then I'll just say project 03. So that's what I'll call mine. So I'll say create project. And then you'll see I guess it says DM2 project 03. And now when that opens, you'll see the screen, the ArcViz kind of starter content like this. Now, if your computer right now is kind of, struggling, is kind of having a hard time, what I'm going to do is maybe as a test, just kind of look around. So I'm just using my left-hand mouse button. I'm dragging around. We'll go through the navigation. But if your computer feels like it's kind of having a hard time here, we can go through some settings before we actually go through the navigation to kind of turn down some of the settings, just so everyone can follow along. So what we're going to do is first we are going to go to, you'll see a ribbon in the top of our perspective window right here. And we're going to go to settings, and then we're going to go to engine scalability settings. And then what you're going to do is you're going to click on a lower quality setting here. So I'm not sure, maybe yours is on epic, maybe yours is on high, but essentially you just want to choose something that works. Now I will notice for some reason, if you click on medium, because we have a post-processing volume in this scene, so essentially a polygon that has some extra effects in it, I've noticed that if you set it to medium, everything turns white. So to fix that, you can set everything to medium or even low, but then turn post-processing to high, and then that should resolve this kind of whited out situation. Let's try putting everything on medium, and then this one on high. And then it should, yeah, there it goes. So it resolves. So now you can see maybe the anti-aliasing isn't quite as good. You know, it's a little bit more pixelated, but that should work. So again, that's going to settings, engine scalability, and then just set it down to whatever you need. So now I'm low for everything except for high post-processing. And now, again, it should clear. So that's one way we can kind of speed up the graphics. Now, I'm going to show you how to increase the graphics again in order to get a nice render, but hopefully this kind of speeds up a little bit. So if we've done this and you're looking around and you're kind of, I'm just holding my right mouse button to look around. If you're looking around, your computer still feels like it's going pretty slow. We can do another thing to reduce the settings. So essentially what we can do, we can go into settings, we can go into project settings, and we can go to the engine. So on the left hand side here, you can see there's a bunch of a scroll down menu. We can go to engine, we can go to rendering, and then if you zoom down, so scroll down, and you scroll down to default settings, what you can do is you can turn off everything except for auto exposure and extend default luminance range. Because if you don't click on these, what you'll find, unless we did a lot more tweaks, that your screen will white out again because your camera is essentially not adjusting to the level of brightness. So in other words, you can turn off bloom, you can turn off ambient occlusion, turn off ambient occlusion static fraction, turn off apply pre-exposure, all of those. And then once you've done that, you'll see this little restart required to apply new settings. So you can just go restart now, and then it's going to restart. And now once that's done, you can just click out of this window by clicking the little X in the upper right hand corner. So now at this point, you sort of have Unreal working on a, you know, it's a workable level. We don't see any kind of shadows cast by this object here, but it gives us a good idea of what our scene's going to look like. So it gives you an idea of the sun direction, because of course you can see shadows on the object. So if your computer is kind of running slow, that's definitely how you can speed it up. So does anyone have any questions about those quality settings before we move on? Okay, so if that's the case, I'm going to turn my settings up a little bit more. So you can see I turned them back up to high, and now I have a shadow. You can also turn down your settings once we populate this file with our geometry. So for navigation, essentially, if you play video games, this should be very familiar to you. Essentially, WASD is the way you're going to sort of pan. So for example, if you press W while holding the mouse, you're going to move forward. if you hold the mouse and press D, you're going to move to the right. Hold the mouse, press A, you're going to move to the left. So that's how you're going to move forward and back. So hold the mouse and essentially move around with the WASD. Now, if you want to move up, you're going to press E. If you want to move down, you're going to press Q. So that's kind of your general panning. So if you're holding down the left mouse button or the right mouse button while pressing WASD and Q and E, you're just going to move around. So just get used to sort of flying around like that. It's kind of fun. There's a few other good tips to know when you are sort of working with Unreal that really helps you fly around. So the first thing is, actually, I guess I should go through the middle mouse button. You can also zoom with the middle mouse button. I don't really do this very often because the next command I'm going to show you. And you can also pan in perpendicular to your view by holding down the mouse button or the middle mouse button and sort of moving around. But I also don't really do this. I don't use the middle mouse button in Unreal at all. But a great way to zoom, especially if you see an object. So for example, there's this camera object way out here. So look around your scene, kind of find something in the distance. So there's a far off camera, and then you're going to press F, and that's going to zoom you to that object. So that's a really great way to kind of move around. So you can see it centers the object in your frame. And a lot of times, especially, for bigger scenes, you'll find this is super useful. Sort of clicking on something and pressing F is going to be a great way to move around the scene. The other thing you can do is if you look in the top right-hand corner of your perspective window here, you'll see there's a camera speed setting. So what you can do, you can click on this camera speed setting and you can increase it. And now when you use WASD, so your movement keys, you're gonna move around much faster. So if you need to get around big areas, you can do this. So it's kind of an interesting way of working. It's kind of similar to, Rhino. It's like a mixture between Rhino, maybe Revit, and also video games. So I find it actually really quite intuitive. Sometimes, of course, I'll try to use Rhino commands in Unreal because, the wires get crossed, I guess, sometimes. So that's kind of how you're going to move around. For the most part, I like leaving my camera speed at about 4, which is the default. The camera speed scaler right below sort of increases and decreases the steps which your, avatar takes. I usually leave this on 1 and then increase, decrease the camera speed because I find that increasing this too much makes it so it's hard to zoom in on anything in particular. It kind of moves too fast. So maybe you're much speedier than I am though, so that works fine for you. So within the perspective view, you're also going to see some other panels along the top. We won't touch on all of them because some of these, the movement, the scaling, etc., is more so for modeling and moving things around the scene. We're doing most of our work in Rhino, so we actually don't need to deal with a lot of these. But I'm going to go through some of the basics that you'll find that work quite well. So if you look at the upper left-hand corner, we're going to have this viewport options drop-down menu. Now, the one I want to bring your attention to first is layouts. Now, right now we're on one plane, so this is the one perspective mode, but if you want something a little bit more like Rhino, and I will show why we'd use this, you can switch to, let's say, 4 planes. So now we have a perspective, we have a back view, so zooming out there, we have a top view, and we have a right view. And now I am using my middle mouse button to zoom in and out. I guess I do use it in the orthographic views. You can also switch to different kind of types of views where you have your perspective in, one large window, and then you have these smaller windows off to the side. One thing to mention, you can maximize these views quickly like this. So let's say you have your views set up like this and you just want to keep them. You can always just leave them so you can still see this icon here and then just click them out like that, and then they will just maximize quickly and then minimize them like that. So kind of similar to Rhino. for the most part, I actually just leave the one pane, and maybe it's kind of slow, but I mean, we're only doing the final steps in Unreal, so I like kind of just switching like that. The other thing next to it is we're going to see the different kind of views, so we can switch between perspective, so that's by default, and we can switch to orthographic views, so top, left, right, front, back, etc., as well as some placed cameras. We'll get into placed cameras, so that's the way we're going to set up views. And so that's just a great way to switch your views. Now, another thing too to mention is to the right is the view mode. So another way that perhaps you could speed up your computer if it is running a little bit slow is you could always switch it to an unlit mode, where you'll see the geometry, but it's unlit. There's also some other, detailed lighting mode where you really see a high contrast version of the detail, lighting only, no materials, reflections only, all these things that you can kind of play around with. We won't get into these very much because for the most part we don't need them, as this is just an introduction. But know that they're here if you need to. One thing that might be especially useful is if you set up, let's say, a camera, and by default it switches to wireframe, you might want to switch it to lit mode, for instance. The other thing I want to show here, just again, this is something that I never really do, is under show, you can essentially turn off like anti-aliasing. Maybe this is going to speed up your computer a little bit more. I personally don't mess around with these too much because I find dealing with the scalability settings is usually good enough. But just in case you do want to turn off some post-processing effects, as well as some anti-aliasing, even the atmosphere, for instance, fog if you have it, these are other things you can turn off. So just be aware that you can turn off different kinds of effects and objects. You can even turn off, for example, certain kind of meshes and everything. I would not play around with this tab too much, just because you might forget that you've turned it off. But if you want to play around with it, that's there. There's a lot of things in here, so I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I cover everything. Unreal's kind of like Rhino in that it has a lot of commands. You're going to use 10 of them, maybe even less. So I've made this workflow so that most of the work's done in Rhino. The other thing you're going to see to the right is the World Outliner panel. And this actually might look quite similar to Rhino, right? We have folders. You can click on them to minimize them. And these folders have different things in them. If you select one of these objects in the folder, you can select it in the World Outliner, and if you press F, it's going to zoom to that object. So that's kind of a nice way to do that. You can also always right-click it and go Focus Selected. So that's just another way of kind of navigating around here if you're not sure what something is in this list. Below this, why don't we select the Cinema Camera Actor? I'll press F to see what it is. So it's this camera here. That's the view it's creating. You can see that below is the details. Now, within these details, you can see that we can, move some of these around. So, for example, its location is sort of controlled by this slider here. Here, its scale can be controlled. Doesn't really matter for a camera. Scale isn't really something we care about. But there are all these details here. Some things that might matter for a camera like this is, of course, the lens setting, the focus settings, film back, all these sorts of things. And but we'll go through this. We'll actually go through details a little bit more next class. This class we won't really need to worry about this too much. But just know that whatever you click on here, it's going to bring the details up for that object down here. So whatever is selected, it's going to bring up the details. Now, in this tab, You can also turn off visibility. So just like Rhino, there's these little eye buttons. So you can turn them off. In Rhino, I guess it's the light bulb. In Unreal, it's the eye. You can turn them off. As well as you can, just like in Rhino, you can select multiple things at once. So for instance, if you just hold Shift and then select something from the top, select essentially the bottom of a list, you're going to select all of these things. So you can see the 3 cameras I've selected. We're selecting all 3 like this. Now, the one thing we're going to do, maybe before I delete this, before we delete these cameras just for fun, we can click play. And what play does is it essentially, if you're creating a video game or an animation, this is going to allow you to see this video or play in the video game or see your animation. So just want to let you know it's there. And also we're just about to delete these cameras. So maybe it's kind of fun to take a look at this first. So this is such an ugly building, but I mean, you can see that the shadows and everything are pretty cool. If you do choose play, you can just hit escape or click stop, and then you'll leave that play mode. But like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to delete a lot of stuff from this scene because ultimately we want to import in our own geometry. So I just like starting out with this template because it has some good stuff in it. It has a background, it has a sun, etc., etc. So just like in Rhino, you can essentially select objects and then hit delete. It'll give you a little message here. So these cameras are linked to another object in the scene. Don't worry about it. So you can click yes all. We're also going to delete the interaction setting. So the notes, oops. The sample geometry, the sequences, and since I deleted those folders, you can see that the items still are there, so now you can just select all the items that were in those folders. So essentially you want to delete everything except for the environment. So your world outliner should look something like this. So you have your exterior, that's just your world, everything. You have your environment, again, pretty much everything, but as this exponential height fog, which is the background, a post-process volume, which is this cube here that I'll show you how to use later on in this class, and then the sun sky, which is sort of our principal lighting right now. You can see then the sun sky, there's, you know, some kind of interesting options we can start to play around with, and we'll touch on that a bit more. So you can see the sun setting right there. It's kind of neat. So does anyone have any questions about sort of just the general layout of this program? There's other things down here. We'll get into the content browser when we start importing Rhino geometry. We won't really worry about the place actors tab until next class when we start to place some HDRI skies. But for the most part, you know, this world outliner and the perspective window is going to be 80% of your work in Unreal for doing architectural renderings. Oh, okay. So Jeremy is asking, what's this pop-up saying compiling shaders in the bottom right? So sometimes in Unreal, it's going to, so shaders compiling like this, right? So essentially what it's doing is it's recalculating the light. So you can see how I had these like unmaterialed cubes that I just placed in, and then it says compiling shaders. I'm putting in the same one, so it's not doing it. Let's see if we can get it to go again. But essentially what that means is it's recalculating the light on these objects. Now, if you ever do get sort of an error where it doesn't look like something's being lit, you can force a compilation of your shaders. And what you do in that case is where it says build, you can just press this drop down menu, and you can go to build lighting only. So essentially that's what that's going to do, is it's going to recompile all that lighting. if you have materials that seem to be showing up improperly, you can just click the main build button. It's going to come up with this little pop-up navigation building completed. You'll also probably have some pop-ups pop up in the middle of your screen. But this is essentially, you can think of it as refresh or redraw in AutoCAD, or redraw materials, or I think there's a redraw lights command in Rhino as well. So that's a good question. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just disable some plugins. So don't worry about this, because I want to take you through what you need to enable. I tried to disable this before class, but it wouldn't let me for some reason. Okay, so the reason why I used Unreal versus, let's say, Unity for this course, well, I'll go into it a little bit here. So the reason why I used Unreal versus Enscape, which some of you have probably used, is because Enscape just gave all Mac users in particular a bunch of grief. So since I know there's a large contingent of Mac users, Unreal seems to work for everyone. So that's why I switched away from Enscape. Unreal also does some cool things with blocks, so it fits with the course. The reason why I did Unreal versus Unity, which is another game engine that you might have heard about that some architects are starting to venture into, is because Unreal has a wonderful pipeline plugin. So when I mean pipeline, I just mean translating geometry from one program to another. It has a wonderful plugin called Datasmith that works with Rhino perfectly, and it imports Rhino geometry nearly perfectly. So we're going to install that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Settings. So click the Settings button, and we're going to go to Plugins. Now, you'll see a little search bar in your upper right-hand corner here, and I want you to type Datasmith. So just Datasmith. And essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to enable a few of these Datasmith plugins. So we want to enable Datasmith CAD Importer. So that's this one here. And it'll give you plugin Datasmith CAD Importer as a beta version, might be unstable, yada yada. Yes, we want to use this. We want to enable Datasmith Content. And then finally, we want to enable, down at the bottom here, Datasmith Importer. So yes. So you're going to have three plugins enabled: Datasmith CAD Importer, Datasmith Content, and also the Datasmith Importer. Now, once you've done all of that, you're going to click Restart Now. Shirley, can we use Enscape instead of Unreal for our finals? No, because I'm going to use Unreal to compile everything together, and we're teaching Unreal in this class. But the Unreal pipeline that I'm teaching is going to be minimally strenuous, I'll put it that way. So I think that you might actually end up preferring... Oh, my computer is struggling. Well, we'll see. If your computer really is struggling right now, we can talk through it. I did do some tests with various different computers before this course started. So I thought that Unreal was going to be the better program. But if there really are some people who are having a super hard time with this, then we can figure it out. It's like, seems next to impossible to figure out one program that, works for everyone, which that's life, The main thing in this course is Rhino anyway, so we'll figure it out. So for anyone, yeah. Okay, so after we've clicked Restart, we're going to click the X here, and then if everything went according to plan, you should be able to see Import Unreal Datasmith file. And this is great. This is what's going to allow us to import directly from Rhino. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Rhino, and I'm going to go to the file that was in today's Dropbox. So under lecture files, Unreal Rendering Part 1, we have the assignment site, assigned materials. Now, this is what the file looks like. In here, you can see that we have our island. It has all the lots on it. I still have the legend here. And what I've done is I've just gone through and I've assigned the proper blocks to the voxels. And I've started to assign textures to a few of these blocks. So I just, have been constrained time-wise. So I haven't applied textures to all of these, but it'll give you a good idea of what this should look like. And what I've done is I've baked all of these blocks onto a layer called Blocks TG. So if you right-click Blocks TG, go select Objects, you'll see that all of the blocks in the tower are selected. So only these. The other thing I'd like you to do, just so I can, just in case something shifts, I'd like you to also select your site. Now, I haven't done a wonderful site manipulation like you guys have, so I just have my basic flat site, but I'd also like you to select your site. Now, the one thing I really want to mention here is the way we've been, modeling, we've been modeling with meshes, right? So for all our blocks here, we've been modeling with meshes. Our output from Bison for our site should also be meshes. But if you've gone through and you've modeled anything on your building that isn't a mesh, and honestly, you can do this. So let's say I'm like, okay, I don't want this piece here. Instead of, this piece right there, I just want, sure, I want this, like that. Oh, this isn't being a very good example. Let's say in the bottom, I just want this. It's sucks to, approachable faces of buildings. I just want this kind of brutal pedestal which my building sits on. That actually looks that probably looks better than the aggregated building. So let's say you want a pedestal or something like this, or you want to go in afterwards and replace some of these blocks with some modeling you do in Rhino to kind of break up the building. You're absolutely allowed to do that. And, in fact, if your building looks better, I'd encourage you to do that. But if you are going to do that, please, please, please make sure that these pieces are meshes. So select your piece, like, this base I've made here, and then go mesh from NURBS object, as few polygons as possible, click OK, delete the NURBS, and now I have this mesh here. Now, the reason why I say this is that you can, using Datasmith, translate NURBS geometry poly surfaces from Rhino to Unreal Engine. But what I've found is that the material texture mapping, so the way that we change the UV maps of, let's say this this wall, for instance, so the bricks were the right size, that UV mapping material is lost in translation most of the times, it seems, when you're using NURBS. If you export meshes, not only will your file size be smaller, easy to use in Unreal, but you'll also maintain all of your texturing information so that you have to do as little work as possible in Unreal. So that is why I say please export a mesh for everything. For the sake of this demonstration, I'll delete this base and I'll just stick with this. Now, you can see when I mapped my pieces, some of my voxels were stretched here. I'll leave it up to you to kind of decide whether or not you want to replace some of these pieces, or maybe you want to go in afterwards and scale some of the taller levels. Maybe make them like that and double them up, etc., etc. I'll leave that up to you. I was originally going to go into how we can start to pick and choose and replace some of these voxels using Grasshopper, but honestly, as the course went along, I just realized it would be too much extra work for the class, so I kind of dropped it. But this is good enough. I'm just saying here that you can post-edit this model if you want. Another tip that I want to give you before importing into Unreal is, let's zoom into the roof column. So this is a piece I've textured. So I'm going to zoom in there, view, zoom, select it all. So I have this block right here, right, that has different materials assigned to it. Remember to edit a block. So you can see I select this object. It says one block instance add to selection. You can either double click it or you can type block edit. So you can type block edit. This pop-up should come up. Or if you want, you can just double click it. One thing that I want you to keep in mind is after you've edited here. So if you want to follow along with this, you'll notice that when I select these brick walls, all of these objects are selected, right? And when I select them even more so, they say one mesh added to selection. And it might seem kind of weird because if we look at this one object, you can see that that doesn't look like one mesh. There's all these pieces which are not connected. Meshes are allowed to be disjoint. So what that means is they don't need to be touching to be one object. What I would encourage you to do is if you do have separate mesh objects after you've textured them, so for example, I have all these little meshes like this, you're going to select your, mesh layers based on their materials. So for example, like last class, I showed you how to set up, let's say, a brick layer. We can go select objects, and you're just going to type join. And it's not going to matter whether or not your meshes are actually physically touching. It's going to join into one object. And this is really, really, really going to help your editing abilities in Unreal. So I'd say this is quite important. So after you've finished, editing your block, you're happy with how it looks. Same thing for this yellow material. This is all the material. So I just select it all and I type join. Same with the concrete. I select it all and I selected join. And now when we go into Unreal, more so not this class, but next class, what we'll see is that we are then able to edit this object as one object rather than having, one face, another face, and another face. It just makes it a lot more intuitive. This example here is also the thing I'm referencing when I was talking about assignment 3, and then I was talking about adherence to best practices. For example, within blocks, materials are joined as one disjoint mesh to facilitate manipulation in Unreal. That's what I'm talking about here. So it's just one of these things that's gonna it's a best practice, and I'll sort of tag these or flag these best practices as they come up. So I have my tower anyways. What we're going to do is we're just going to select it. So we can select it by clicking on the blocks TG layer, going select objects. And then what we're going to do, very simply, we'll just go File, Export Selected. Then go to, I'll just export it to my desktop. Save as a Rhino 6 or Rhino 5. Make sure that Save Textures is on. And then we'll just call it whatever you want. So in this case, maybe just the date 20/07/22. Tower. Okay, so once that's saved, you're ready to go back into Unreal. So in Unreal, open up Unreal again. Datasmith should be up. So click on the Import Unreal Datasmith File button. And you'll see here at the bottom right, if you installed the plugin properly, you should be able to see in this little drop-down menu Rhino file formats. So Rhino file formats.3dm. So you can leave it all files, or you can go to Rhino file, doesn't really matter. So navigate to where you saved your project, click open. Now, this is referring to this content browser down here. And essentially in your project, you can store different pieces, so materials, models, etc., in different locations. You can create a new folder, and I like creating a new folder for Rhino import. So what you can do is you can right click on content, go new folder, and then you can call this folder Rhino import. Oh, and you're not allowed to use spaces. I always forget that. Unreal has really strange naming conventions that I forget constantly, but no spaces is one of them. So Rhino import, just make sure that's highlighted, click OK. Now, it's going to give you this Datasmith import options next. The process, make sure geometry, yes, you want geometry. Materials and textures, in this case, yes. In this case, we don't want lights, we don't want cameras, we don't want animations. If you've set these up in Rhino, you can import them. For this tutorial, we're not going to import them because I want to show you how to set up cameras and lights in Unreal. But you can always play around with making them in Rhino and then importing them. The important thing for us is under the Geometry and Tessellation options panel. Geometry, I want you to switch it to import Rhino meshes and UVs. Now, this is one of the reasons why we've been working through meshes in Rhino, right? And you can notice it says UVs, so those are the texture maps. If we don't convert our objects to Rhino meshes, then we'll have to use the option import as NURBS, tessellate in Unreal. And what that means is Unreal's going to convert our NURBS to meshes, and because of that, it loses the UV or the texture mapping information. So that's why we've worked with meshes, and that's why under geometry we switched this drop-down menu to import Rhino meshes and UVs. Chord tolerance, that option goes away. Don't worry about this extra things because, again, this all relates to import as NURBS. And once that's ready, click import. And it will take a little while. Not too long depending on your computer, but it could, take up to a couple minutes. So does anyone have any questions right now while this is importing? Okay, so I'm not sure if yours has imported yet, but that's okay. While yours is importing, I'll just keep on going here and then just follow along with the video. And then once it imports, then you can follow along. So we have this giant tower importing in, and that's great. Now you might notice that it's far away. Now if you use the WASD buttons and you're moving towards it, it might feel like it's taking. Oh, all of a sudden I have feedback. Okay, it might feel like it's taking a little while to get there. So remember, you have two options. You can either select an object in the distance and press F, or you can always, if you want, turn up your camera speed. So you can fly a little bit faster to get around your building quicker. So again, I wish I had time to get all the textures on, but you can see that this thing is looking, if I do say so myself, pretty cool in Unreal, right? So you kind of see all these weird Animal Crossing gargoyles. You can see how the textures have been retained in Unreal. So we've textured in Rhino, they're retained in Unreal. That looks great. And more so, the entire building is here. You can also see in our world outliner, so you can click on the little scroll bar on the right hand side, that all of these objects are now imported into the scene. So we have all these individual meshes, but then we also have these blocks. So you can see these blocks relate to the blocks in Rhino. So for instance, a column bottom block, tgotten, column bottom, tgotten, block 2. The interesting thing about this, and the reason why we use Unreal in this case, is that we can actually go in. So in your content browser, and we'll review this more next class. I just want to cover this while other people's files are importing. If you go into geometries, what you're going to find, remember I said it's best to join up your objects. You can see that there's a lot of meshes in here that I haven't joined. These are all the meshes that are in these blocks. I just really haven't had a time to texture. But if you go into Unreal and you look at your, for instance, on mesh 13, double click it, what you'll see is that that mesh piece is there, and there's only one. So that's why we use blocks, because this mesh piece is used over and over and over. In the same way blocks are used in Rhino, this mesh is used over and over and over in Unreal. And that's how, hopefully, at least for most of us, we're able to actually work with a huge set of geometry like this in a kind of complicated or I'd say sophisticated rendering program like Unreal. It really limits the amount of data that we actually have stored in here, because it's really actually just the same piece of data referenced over and over and over again. So that's why this course was built around using blocks. You can just kind of, it's the same with Enscape. It's like the first time I started using Enscape, I just spent like a couple hours flying around, and it's pretty fun. So you can kill a lot of time this way. Anyways, you can reduce your tower folder. So right now you can see I have the tower object. And one thing to point out here is you can make a new folder just like you can in Rhino. And if you want to, you could always right click in the world outliner, go create folder, and just call it Rhino import. And this is just going to give you another import. So then I'm moving into there, and it is going to take a second to move into there. Okay. Oh, did I accidentally? Oh, I accidentally moved into the environment tab, so that's why it's doing that. Okay, so if you want to, you can move your geometry into an import tower there. Let's go back to content. Doesn't really matter. We'll deal with this again last class or next class, but just a quick preview. So hopefully this has loaded for you at this point. Again, if anyone's just is going through this and they're like, oh, I really can't get this to work, send me an email and we can kind of figure it out. If Enscape works for you and this doesn't, you know, maybe that's something we can talk about. So we can figure it out. I want to, you know, make sure everyone gets something nice out of this class. At this point, I would also save. So to save your project, you can either go to File and then Save Current, or you could click Save Current right here. So saves the current level to disk. All right. Now, if you remember, we started out with some kind of the starter content, as it were. So we started out with this sun sky right here. That's what this compass is. We also started out with the, so right there, I guess you have to click on the compass, as well as this post-processing volume like that, and then as well as the exponential height fog. Now, you might want to move these around, and a lot of times you might want to move these around just for ease of access. So our building has imported way off from what is Unreal's origin. And the reason why it's done that is, if you think about it, we imported it in relation to this center. So if you're on lot 30 or 19, your building might import directly next to this starter content. Since we're kind of way out in the outer fringes of the island, we import a little bit further away. So I just want to show you how you can sort of basically move these objects over here so they're in a little bit better of a position. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that the, the fog, for instance, when you move it around, it is going to make some changes in the background. So what I mean is, it's going to, I guess you can't really see it. Sun sky, you gonna make some changes? Yeah, so like the sun sky, for instance, might make some changes, but we'll go through that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna click on the viewport options tab. We're gonna go to layouts and then 4 panes. And then what we're gonna do is we are just going to select in our world outliner, our exponential height fog, our post-process volume, and our sun sky. And just zoom out, and you can see where they're located in the right frame, the back frame, the top frame. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to use the little, if you click here on the select and translate objects, or you can press W, essentially this is going to bring up essentially like a gumball like we use in Rhino. So from there, what you can do is you can just move these objects in relation to your building just so they're closer by. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just moving the exponential height fog in the sun sky. And the reason why I do that is just so they're kind of closer by to my building. I'm going to look in the back view, move it under my building. So, just use the orthographic views to make sure this is moved. And then what's even more important than moving the exponential height fog in the sun sky is this post-process volume. So what I want you to do is take this post-process volume, and we'll go through it, but essentially what a post-process volume is it's a 3-dimensional space that's going to apply like lens flares, bloom, dust, stuff like that to your shot. That allows you to affect how your image looks, but it needs to sort of surround the geometry, right? So what we're going to do is, again, select your post-process volume with the movement widget, so W, and make sure it's aligned with your tower in all of these windows. So you can see it's aligned in top, right, back, and also in 3D, you can see it's right below. What we can do now is, with this post-process volume selected, is we can go into a window, and we can select the scale, I guess you call it widget or tool. You can also click R. So click the little scale button or hit R. And then what we're going to do is we're going to scale it up. Come on. And you might really need to drag it till it's kind of surrounding your tower. Like so. Now it's worth mentioning that while your post-process volume is selected, so right there, you can also go down to your details panel and kind of fine-tune the scales with these sliders. You can even, for example, if I want Y to be twice as large, I can just type 200 and it's going to be twice as large. And then now I want the Z value to be maybe about 5 times as high, so maybe I'll try 150. And then what I'll do, once I've scaled it, it looks big enough, I'll hit W or move, and I will move this up. And what we want to get to is just our post-processing value around our object, like so. So this is any effect that we put within this post-processing volume, it will affect our render, like so. You might even just want to make it like way bigger as well. doesn't really matter. Just make sure it's centered on your object. You just want to make sure it's around your object. So why don't we take a break now? We will reconvene at 7:16. But if anyone has any questions, I'll definitely stick around through the break. But we'll say 7:17 now. But hopefully I'll give you a chance to sort of catch up to where we are now if your computer's a little bit slow. But please, again, if your computer's really struggling, send me an email and we'll figure it out. But I think it should work for most people. So I'll resume at 7:17. Okay. And I'm just going to resume the recording and we're good to go. Okay, so essentially where we are now is we have our model imported. We've sort of looked at some of the navigation and also just the how we can move around in the screen and how we can move around the program. What I want to focus on for the second part of this class is just how to set up a view and then sort of do a render. And then what I'm going to touch on next class, in next class I think we'll actually only kind of take up half the class. It'll give some more work time for questions. I might actually do a little bit of a Q&A at the end of this class. For reference, if you didn't stick around at the end of last class when I was answering questions, it actually might be worth going through the video because I went over another voxel assignment. So it's in Grasshopper, so it's maybe a good thing to review if you want more examples. If we do finish early, moving through the Unreal material today, I can do the same, or I can sort of tackle any other questions you may have. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up and take renders for the rest of this class, and then next class we're going to go in and play around with how you can use an HDR sky. So create quite realistic lighting from an HDR sky file, as well as how to tweak materials in Unreal so they really have a lot more depth. So that's something that we'll tackle next class. So setting up cameras, it's kind of like saving a view in Rhino. So if you think about it in Rhino, if you're setting up a rendered view, even in Enscape, a lot of the times you're going to set up a view, and if you're in Enscape you might use something like the little camera icon here, so creates a named view in Rhino that relates to the current Enscape view. If you're in Rhino, you will probably just go to your named views tab, so named views, and you'll just save a view and you'll call it render 01. And then you can move around and then go back to render 01. So we're going to do the same thing in Unreal. We're going to essentially set up some cameras, and they're going to behave the same way as saved views in Rhino and Enscape behave. So probably the easiest way to set up a view is to just fly around. So navigate around your model, kind of find a kind of a view that you would like, and we're going to adjust effects afterwards. So this is mainly for just composition. So let's say I want a kind of overall view of my building looking up. There's my view like that, right? Now there's some other things we can adjust. If you drop down the viewport options, you can also change your field of view. And this is going to choose your lens, or change your lens length. So if you want like a Zaha Hadid style, like crazy forced perspective style view to make everything look very, I guess, monumental and exaggerated, you can do that, right? So maybe I'm going to look up like this. So I'm trying to make this tower look as tall as possible. So you can change your field of view like so. Once you are happy with your view, and essentially what I'm referring to here is what we want to do for part 2, so one render from the Unreal Engine, please submit one captured render. This is what I'm talking about, this process here. So once you're happy with the composition of your view, what you can do is you can, again, choose the viewport options drop-down menu, and then go create camera here. And then you're going to choose camera actor. So Cine Camera Actor is for animation. We're going to be making still images, so camera actor, like so. And now you can see it's created this little camera actor like that. The other thing that you'll notice is after you've created this, you can press escape, and it's going to get rid of that little pin button or the little camera preview. If you want to bring up the camera preview again, all you have to do is click on the camera actor in your world outliner, or if you just happen to be flying by it, you can select this little camera icon like so. Once you set up some cameras, it might be a good idea to create a camera folder in your world outliner. So in your world outliner, just right click, go create folder, and then create a new folder called cameras. So I'm a big fan of folders and, you know, parent layers in Rhino, etc., etc. And if you really want to, you can also edit it by, so if you want to rename it, you can right click it, go to edit, and then go to rename right there. And then you could call this something like looking up at tower view. So just to go over that again, because I stumbled through it, because again, thinking of Rhino, right click this layer, go to edit, and then rename. And then it'll allow you to rename. So unlike Rhino, double clicking it will not work. So you'll notice that even though we've clicked on it, even if you press F like you do other, you know, objects, what that's going to do is it's going to bring the camera sprite itself into view. Now, you will see a preview of the camera when you select it, but in your main perspective window, you're looking at the camera object itself. So in order to it's called pilot this camera, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to select your looking up at tower camera, or whatever you've named it, and then you're going to go pilot looking up at tower, or pilot camera. So pilot, and that's going to put you back in that camera's view. Now, when you change around like this, you're going to see that it changes around your camera, right? So that save's going to be made. If you don't want to make a save, you can essentially just Control Z a couple times until it changes back to the view. But just be aware that changes that you make, or, you know, view changes that you make when you're in the pilot view will be made. So usually what I like doing is setting up the camera, you know, make some adjustments, but when I'm happy with it, I'll just, you know, leave it as is, and I won't move around once I'm in the pilot view. If you want to create a new tower or a new camera, you can always go right click it, go to edit, and then duplicate. And then that's going to create a new camera. And then from there, if you want to use this as a basis as a new like view, so maybe you want to move the view a little bit to the left there or whatnot, now you have looking up at tower 2. Or this is the original right here. So looking up at tower 1 is the one we moved, but if you go to looking up at tower, it has that original view. So again, right click, pilot. If you want to exit the pilot view, you can just click this little eject icon here that kind of pops up next to this other icon here that's a little camera. And that'll bring you back into your main window like so. So once you're, actually one other thing I should show. So let's say we have our looking up at tower 2. That's the view that I set up first, and I duplicate it. You can also, if you want to make adjustments with the details panel, you can do that. And you can see it's sort of giving me a preview right there. I can also pilot it. Oh, pilot this one. and then make these adjustments here. So just know that you can make fine scale adjustments in your detail panel as well. There's going to be some other options in here. So there's going to be post processing. So for your camera, for example, bloom, you can change it. So I'd just say go through all of these effects and kind of look at what they do. So again, just to go over that again, you select your camera. You either have a little preview screen there or you're in piloting mode. And then when you scroll down, you can go to post process and then play with some different image effects. So for example, there's vignette. If you want to do that, there's lens flares. Don't do crazy lens flares. I think it's a little bit maybe done to death, but maybe it looks good in a certain view. For this, I don't know. I'm gonna turn that off. You can also play around with the different camera settings, so different ISOs, shutter speeds, etc., etc. It's chromatic aberration, which is like that weird kind of lens, maybe old VCR effect. I'm not a photographer, so a lot of these terms I just I know them as things I can play around with the dials with. So just you can play around with these. So definitely play around with these if you want to, or you don't have to. Essentially, you just want to set up a render that looks good. You can of course play around with this in Photoshop afterwards. So all the white balance, global, shadows, etc., etc. So I won't go through all of those, but you definitely can play around with them. Now, once you've applied some post-processing effects or not, it's up to you. You're sort of ready to capture an image. So what you're going to do is you're going to click again down on your viewport options menu. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to high resolution screenshot. And it's going to bring up this high resolution screenshot splash menu. So the screenshot size multiplier, for this class you can leave it 1. But probably for an actual render, you're going to increase it. And essentially that's going to create something that's, in this case, 5 times larger than this preview window. You can also crop it, but I don't really do this. So let's see. So honestly, awesome. So what I did, I'm not sure if you saw this, but essentially I just showed that, if you turn down the screenshot, 5 took a while. 2, if I turn it down to 2, essentially it saves here. Now, it's going to tell you where your screenshot saved, but if it disappears, do not worry. If you do catch it, you can just click here. It'll open it up. But if it did disappear, essentially it's going to be in your project folder. So that's essentially going to be the same place in that startup screen where you saved your project. So in my case, it's under my documents, under Unreal Projects, and then the DM2 Project 03, under Saved, and then Screenshots, Windows, and then you'll see here all the screenshots that you made. Now these save as PNG files, so afterwards you can just export them in Photoshop. Now, you can see I've left on this kind of like post-processing box. If you're going to edit in your own sky, don't worry about it. But if you want to kind of remove this object, you can just select it and then you can just turn it off. So turn the visibility off and this will essentially turn it off. Now, if you're using the post-process volume, in what post-process volume, maybe it's a good time to get into it now, is essentially in the way we set up some post-processing effects for a camera. Post-process volume allows you to do the same thing outside of the camera view. So for example, when I select post-process volume here, I can go to a few of the lens details. So I can change depth of field within this. So you can see I can change depth of field. So essentially similar features that we had in the camera. You know, I have all the image effects, so the vignette. I already have vignette in the camera, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, Jeremy.
So is the advantage that you can do that
globally? Here, wait, just one second. Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So is the advantage that you can do that globally instead of doing it individually for every single camera that you have?
So can you do it globally instead of doing it for like one post-process volume? That's your question?
Like instead of editing the post-processing for individual cameras, you can do this for the entire post-processing volume, and then it would be affecting every single camera, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what the volume does. The volume affects all the cameras, where editing the one camera, it's just editing that one camera. So if I switch out this camera, the vignette, for instance, that, or the effects that camera had disappear. But if we're in this view, and the post-processing volume is on, then those effects will appear. Does that kind of make sense? So is post-processing volume affects all cameras? Cameras are just affect the one camera. So some other things you can do in post-processing, again, there's some like motion blur, reflections, translucency, these kind of like rendering features that you can change. Again, I won't get too much into these really at all, because I think they're a little bit advanced. A lot of these I've never even used, but essentially what you need to know is that post-processing of volume can be used like inside, outside of camera. It'll affect everything, whereas cameras are specific views. Now, if you do want to essentially hide post-processing in a view, probably the easiest way to do it is just to select it and then change its scale. So for example, if this were my view, I might just change its scale so it's out of the frame. Like so. So if this was my view right there, then that could just be edited out. Something like that. Let's see what else I have here. Oh, yeah. So one other thing. So now, you know, you've set up your view. You have your shot composed. This maybe is what you want your view to look like so. If you have turned your scalability, you know, down quite low. So for example, everything's on the low, but it was post-processing high. When you're at this point, so you have this kind of preview here, what you can do is you can save your camera. So, you know, let's say we create a new camera from here. So create camera here, camera actor. There's my new camera. Now you can change your setting to something else. So epic, for instance, or, you know, cinematic, whatever you're able to do. Because you're not going to have to be flying around, so you can boost up a little bit, and then from there you can do high resolution screenshot and then do the multiplier like so. Now, one thing when I was kind of exploring Unreal earlier in the summer, and it looks like they still haven't fixed it, and this is kind of disappointing, but it'll come in a future version, I'm sure, is orthographic views don't work, it seems, in rendered modes. So what I mean is we have our wireframe mode here. If we switch it to, let's say, lit, it seems like this mode isn't really going to work. Now, I checked online, so here are my class notes, and essentially it just, from this post from, it was like asked years ago, and then later on there was an update just saying like, no, it's still not being solved. Essentially this bug, it seems like, hasn't been solved since 2016. So if you do figure out how to do an orthographic view, let me know. That might be something you want to do in Rhino, so that's a true orthographic. However, you can kind of approximate a orthographic view by essentially picking more or less a side view like so, and then changing your field of view, right? So you can change it so it's tiny, so 5. Zoom out, so maybe you want to set your camera speed to 8, your camera scalar speed way out, and then just press W, so you get this kind of far away side view. I know it's a little bit clunky, but it seems like a good way to do it. Again, I'll keep you updated if that changes. So let's just go looking at this, because I've lost the view. It is kind of hard to move around when you're in this kind of very shallow field of view mode, but that's kind of the way you gotta do it. But I've found, honestly, like zooming around, you can get some kind of cool like axo views from this. So for instance, you could go up to roughly the 45-degree view and then take down your field of view and then zoom out by pressing W and S in conjunction. And then you get this eventually kind of cool ortho mode render in Unreal. So that's how I'd do that. I mean, if you are doing an elevational render at this point, I'd say maybe it's better to do it in Rhino, but I think this kind of view is definitely doable in Unreal. So I just wanted to show that. The last thing I will mention, well, I have 2 more things. So the last thing I'll mention, though, is that let's go there. You can change the sun. So essentially, we'll deal more with HDR backgrounds, but if you select the sun sky object, in its detail panel, you can see you can change things like its location, so the latitude and longitude. If you want to switch this to, Vancouver, for instance, you can do so. The time zone. It does kind of move a little bit slow when you change it. The time zone, the north offset, as well as the month, the day, and the solar time. So that is the way you would do that. I guess the final thing to say before we finish this lecture is exiting. So if you want to save your file, if you're working on it one night but you want to work on it the next night, of course, you can just go save current. Unreal, I haven't used more than one, I guess, like quote unquote level, because I'm not a game designer. I'm not, well, I need to say intern architect AIBC. So I've always just saved a single level. So essentially you can just click save right there, and then you can close your project. It'll come up with this save content. This is essentially, it's just asking if you want to save all this geometry in your project folder, and then you can just make sure all is selected, go save selected, and you can say, or you can see that it's going to save all your meshes in your project folder. Now, the next time you go into Unreal, instead of starting new, you can select your project from the top right there, and then you can just click Open Project, and it'll bring you back to where you were. So that's just how you close it, how you save it, and how you get back into it. So